think we can all agree that Mercedes-Benz does not make boring cars. But what if you wanted something a bit better than a Benz, while still being a Benz? You turn to their good friends AMG. AMG's origins begin way back in the late 60s when former Mercedes engineers Hans Werner, Alfreich, and Erhard Melcher left Mercedes-Benz because their bosses wouldn't let them race. So they founded a company to go racing. They called it Alfreich Melcher Grossbach, or AMG. Grossbach is where they worked, by the way, where they shut up their shop. Fun fact, it was in one of the founders' garages, so the more you know. Their first project was quite a daunting one. The Mercedes 300 SEL was already a very impressive machine. 6.3-liter V8, propelled this 16-foot-long luxury limo to the fastest sedan in the world. But it was a 16-foot-long luxury limo, so the handling was rather barge-ish. And AMG decided this massive vehicle is the perfect one to go racing with. So they completely tore the vehicle apart from the ground up and rebuilt it. So they had a brand new, completely rebuilt engine, bore out from 6.3 liters to 6.8, with new everything pretty much, resulting in 428 naturally aspirated horsepower. They partnered that with lightweight aluminum panels, widened the thing with massive fender flares to fit even bigger tires, and the thing was actually pretty fast. It was pretty much a silhouette racer by that point. In fact, it shared so little resemblance and the bright red paint job of their sponsors that it was nicknamed the Red Pig, and it competed in 24 Hours of Spa, and, well, it won its class anyway, came second overall. And this success in their first major race meant customers just started flocking to AMG because they wanted a Benz that could go even faster, and AMG were the ones to do it. But we would have to fast forward a decade or so when they introduced an even madder four-door sedan. They turned their attention to the 230e mid-size sedan. They added a subtle body kit to drop the drag coefficient to just 0.25, and then they threw in a 6-liter V8 making 380 horsepower. And with the all-black paint, with the all-black 5 spokes, the thing looked mean. And with the acceleration to match, this thing had a 0 to 60 in 5 seconds flat and was comparable in acceleration to a Lamborghini Countach. It was about as subtle as a hammer, as one auto reviewer put it. And since the German word for hammer happens to be hammer, they called it the AMG Hammer, which might just be one of the most criminally underrated names in all of car history. Just calling your car the Hammer is awesome. The Hammer proceeded to set the benchmark for all sports saloons to come, and it made another car company take notice, but it wasn't Mercedes. It was Mitsubishi. Mitsubishi already had a high-performance version of the Galant called the VR4. It's a very good car, but they partnered up with AMG in 1989 to tune the Galant, apparently. The thing made 170 horsepower at 8,000 RPM with front-wheel drive. It remains one of the only front-wheel drive cars that AMG has ever made, and it was, not very successful. Only about 500 were made before the partnership ended. But the Hammer did not just bring Mitsubishi crawling to AMG. It brought Mercedes crawling back. Yep, the former Mercedes engineers were contacted by Mercedes themselves and asked if they wanted to be partners, which AMG agreed with. And they immediately began modifying luxury sedans like the W126 and the W201 series to absurd success, with some making up to 500 horsepower. And then Mercedes gave them a real big task: to win the GT1 World Sports Car Championship. So, AMG responded with the naturally aspirated 6-liter V12 CLK-GTR. This thing was a true prototype race car with over 600 horsepower. And you know what? It won back-to-back championships in 1997 and 1998. And the crazier thing is they made 30 road cars for FIA homologation purposes. They cost $1.6 million in 1998, and they had an even bigger 7.3-liter V12, which did 0 to 60 in under 4 seconds. It was the definition of a race car for the road. It was way too low, the overhangs were massive, the tires were low profile, the chassis was incredibly stiff. It was insane and impractical as hell. It impressed Mercedes so much they bought a majority stake in AMG and converted them into their in-house tuning shop. And once they became the in-house tuning shop, they started tinkering on anything that took their fancy. They didn't worry about things like cornering agility or practicality or usefulness. They said, screw it, go big, damn it, supercharger. So we have things like SUVs, regular sedans, sports cars, and even a wagon. Yes, they made an all-wheel drive 500 horsepower V8 minivan with a top speed of 155 miles an hour in case you were really late to soccer practice. And while they have toned down their silliness a bit, especially after the minivan debacle, they are still quite mad. The brand spanking new 2020 E63 AMG sedan has full all-wheel drive with a twin-turbocharged V8, making 600 horsepower and 627 foot-pounds of torque. It can do the quarter mile in 10.9 seconds. This thing weighs almost 5,000 pounds, and it's a 10-second car while still pulling a G in the corners. There's even a freaking drift mode, and it is in the state as though you can get it in the States. So we have the opportunity to have a twin-turbocharged V8 with all-wheel drive mounted to an estate car that can also drift and can do a quarter mile in 10 seconds. Yeah. But okay, maybe you don't want the $170,000 sedan, fine. Why don't you go for the ultimate hot hatch? 9 super hot hatch. In the definition of hot hatch excessiveness, AMG tuned the 4-cylinder to 415 horsepower, going to all 4 wheels, with functional aerodynamics. And by the way, that 4-cylinder is the most powerful 4-cylinder ever made on a road car. But okay, those are just 2 examples. You can't get that crazy most of the time. It's a bit sensible. Well, I shall point you to the AMG G-Wagen. Now, this is very different for AMG. It's not focused on straight-out top speed or acceleration or drifting, although it does have a near 600 horsepower V8 with a top speed of 145, but that's not its main point. This is an SUV after all. An SUV with a trail package with softer shocks, all-terrain tires, adaptive dampers, a skid plate, and most importantly of all, mud flaps, because those look sick. But okay, surely you can't get crazier than a 577 horsepower twin-turbo SUV that can also go off-roading if you so desire. Except for when you put another axle on it. Because that's what they did with the AMG 6x6, which may well be the definition of excess. It was originally designed for the Australian military, but some rich people said, I want one, if you give it a good interior, so they did. Let's just run through some of the numbers, shall we? This thing has 3 axles, 5 locking differentials, 18 inches of ground clearance, 37-inch off-road tires, 540 horsepower, 570 foot-pounds of torque. It weighs over 9,000 pounds and cost 800 grand. Oh, and let's not forget, it can wade through a full yard of water and has an onboard compressor to inflate and deflate the tires on command. What else do I need to say? It's a freaking tank for the road. Okay, I can hear you saying, this is supposed to be an in-house tuning shop, not Mad Max. And I can see where you're coming from. And so can AMG, because they made the Black Series. Instead of dialing cars up to 11 on the driftometer, or the off-roadometer, or the excessiveness meter, they decided to focus their efforts on the track. And they've only made a few of these cars so far, mainly their high-performance two-door coupes, but the recipe is as follows. Stripping the weight out, stiffening the suspension, stiffening the chassis, widening the track width, and fitting comically large aerodynamics. And then maybe just for good measure, you throw in a bit of more power and more torque, just for the funds, you know? AMG is not just in that building a whole new car business. No. Because they'll offer their engines for sale as well as some partnerships thrown in. So they'll supply the V8s for Aston Martin. And they supply the massive V12s that power the ridiculously expensive and exquisite Paganis. I mentioned motorsport at the beginning, and I'm gonna cycle back to it now because oh my, Mercedes and AMG have been in a lot of motorsport, and I just wanted to group it into one batch, okay? Because, well, let's just say their Le Mans effort did not go as planned after 1998, so they withdrew and started competing in touring car racing like DTM with the CLK, GT3 racing with the SLS and the new AMG GTS. Oh, and they're one of the most successful Formula 1 teams of all time. Of course, you do tend to win 5 championships in a row when you spend over $400 million a year on your team, which is more than the GDP of some countries. But on the positive side of spending almost $500 million a year on your racing team, you do get to move that racing tech to the road once in a while, which is what the AMG Project 1 is for. This is taking Formula 1 engines and chassis and technology to the road, and it's not like the F50, okay? This is legit. This thing has a honest-to-God Formula 1 V6 in it, making over 1,000 horsepower, and it can rev to 11,000 RPM, and it weighs under 3,000 pounds, and it has a top speed of 217 miles an hour, and it can make its own weight in downforce. And the engine only lasts 31,000 miles. And it costs like $2 million. But it is the closest thing to a honest-to-God Formula 1 car for the road. And that's no small feat.